Muslims make a big claim that Islam is applicable to every time and place, which means that this faith or this religion is supposed to be able to exist regardless of what the cultural norms are, regardless of what the technological advancements are, and regardless of people's understanding at that current time and place. And this is a big claim to make, especially for a faith that started more than 1455 years ago. And this is something that not all faiths are able to make. As a matter of fact, many of the faiths, they focus on finding what's called the personal development aspect or the spiritual connection aspect in the human being. They don't deal with the logistical aspects of humanity. They don't deal with the financial transactions of the person, the individual, or of organizations. But Islam makes a claim that it does deal with all of these aspects. Now, as a quick common sequence of this claim is, well, how do Muslims accommodate new scenarios that never existed at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? And they were not explicitly mentioned in the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, or the Sunnah, which is the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, in order to get to there, this is a very vast topic, and it is well structured in Islam because there is built-in aspects in the faith that allows it to be morphable, that allows it to be adaptable within any context that you put it in. Islam didn't come to wipe out existing cultures. It didn't come to eliminate the like other lifestyles. It came to appropriate certain things to make them better. And hence, with the different cultural elements in the world today, and with the different understanding of people and the different norms that people adhere to, it is important for a faith that makes such a big claim to have within it tools that allow people to utilize this faith and still continue to be true to their identity. And I want to summarize a little bit about some aspects of this topic. I'm not going to dive too deep into it because that will require quite a bit of time. But I'll tell you that in Islam, there are things that are changeable, and these they're called al-mutaghayyirat, and there are things that are not changeable. These are the constants. These are al-thawabit. Al-thawabit are things that, or the constants are things that will never change with time or place. For example, a belief that there's only one God. That will never change in the Islamic tradition. I cannot come into another area or into another country or into another region and then just looking at their cultural norms and say, okay, well, these people believe that there are 1,000 gods, for example. There are thousands of gods. And then I would say, okay, well, Islam only says there is one God. So we're going to accommodate that a little bit. And the way we're going to do it is that we're going to say, okay, Islam accepts 5 gods. No, that'll never happen because these are constants. These are things that do not change. Also, I'm not going to come into another time and place and say, okay, well, we're really busy at this time and we cannot pray the 5 daily obligatory prayers. So we're going to just make them one obligatory prayer. Why? Because these things are constants. However, when we look at the changeable things, the al-mutaghayyirat, that's where things can be accommodated depending on the time and place. So a ruling in one country, a ruling in one region is not necessarily applicable in another region. Now, when we look at the sources of deriving rulings in Islam, generally there are 3 sources. The first one is the Quran. This is the very first source, the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims. This about 600 pages long book, holy book, and this has the highest level of priority when deriving rulings. So if a ruling is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, then that has the highest priority. The second to that is the prophetic tradition, or what's called a sunnah. And the prophetic tradition is everything that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, either said, did, or agreed upon. Now, why is agreed upon important? Because sometimes things would happen in front of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he would not say that this is not okay. Now, because the belief is that he is the messenger of God and he is here on this earth, or he was here on earth to guide people, that means it is mandatory and necessary for him to comment on everything that is wrong or evil immediately. Which means to say that, okay, this thing that happened right now is not acceptable, or that this thing that happened right now is acceptable. Now, if he did not comment on it immediately or later on and he just left it, that means he had seen an act that by silence he accepted, which means that this has become a source of ruling. And then the third aspect, the general source of deriving rulings in Islam, is what's called al-ijtihad. Al-ijtihad means that to exert an effort of some sort to deduct and to arrive to the rulings of these new scenarios. So, for example, smoking. Smoking did not exist at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The cigarettes didn't exist in his time and place when he lived about 1400 years ago. But now it has become something that is common. After he passed on, and in the recent history, cigarettes have become a common thing. So if I open the Quran, there is no exact ruling that says smoking is forbidden. If I open the tradition, the prophetic tradition, there is no explicit thing that says that smoking is forbidden. So how do I arrive to that ruling? Well, that's where the third source of rulings come in, which is the ijtihad, which is exerting an effort to arrive to that ruling based on a whole bunch of criteria. That criteria is out of the scope of this video because it changes based on the school of thought. And in the Islamic tradition, in the Sunni Islamic tradition, which is the mainstream Islam, there are currently 4 acceptable schools of thought. This is just a fun fact. I'm not going to dive into it right now. We can talk about it in another video. So now when we look at the idea of smoking, initially the scholars, when they looked at the cigarette, they did not have an understanding that this is harmful to the life of the person. What they looked at when they saw it initially, before the later research and advancements in cancer and whatnot, they found that it smells really bad. It wastes a lot of money, and there's no explicit benefit to it. So they said they gave it the ruling of makruh, or disliked, based on this criteria, based on their understanding, and based on looking at the objectives that are mentioned in the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, and the Sunnah, which is the prophetic tradition. Later on, they have arrived at the conclusion that it is forbidden because it actually harms life, and it can actually result in the person killing themselves. And they said, well, in the Quran, there is an explicit verse that says, وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. Don't throw yourselves into doomness, into destruction with your own hands. And from that verse, and this is, by the way, a very simplistic way of explaining how they arrived to that ruling, they said, okay, well, these cigarettes, when we smoke them, they don't only harm the person who's smelling them by making them smell bad, and it doesn't only harm their finances because they're spending a lot of money on it, it actually harms their self because it can result in cancer and death. And hence, the ruling for smoking is forbidden, is haram. Now, you see that the ruling initially did not exist in the Quran and the prophetic tradition, but that did not prevent the scholars of Islam to deduct and to arrive at that ruling based on the built-in tools within the faith. This is just one example. There are many other examples that we can potentially talk about. Things like cloning, some things that pertain to technology, things that pertain to complex financial transactions, systems, political maneuvers, all this stuff, military strategy, all these things might not have existed at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they might not have explicit rulings in the Quran and the Sunnah, but the rulings can be deduced and can be arrived to using the last aspect and the last source of rulings in Islam, which is the ijtihad, which is exerting an effort in researching and arriving at this ruling. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next episode.